perpetrator, because other members of the family or of the school or of the scouting group really are loyal to that perpetrator without knowing that they are a perpetrator. There's also fear of negative consequences, being punished for allowing this to happen. And some kids have even told me that the perpetrator told them that if they disclose this information, they will be sent to kid jail. There is confusion about these sexual abuse at times too, that does not lead to an immediate disclosure, and the longer it goes on, the harder it is to disclose. Many times the individual is trying to protect themselves and or siblings or family members from being abused, so they keep that secret. In some families, parents and other adults are not really believing that the abuse happened and don't trust the disclosure by the child. Many times it's asked, well, don't kids lie? Well, yes, kids lie, but adults lie too. And lying is not the issue. The issue is, did abuse happen, and can we substantiate that? Parents and or other adults are not really approachable for their children to talk with. Children at times don't have the words to describe the abuse. Another lag issue has to do with the child may not recognize the significance of the sex abuse, that this should not be happening between adults and children. Older children do disclose abuse at a higher rate than younger children. The lack of a younger child in their ability to describe the abuse or to articulate it plays a part in them not necessarily being able to disclose it immediately. And children usually demonstrate the abuse by use of negative behaviors rather than words, because as we learn developmentally, children show us what they're feeling more often than telling us what they're feeling. So it doesn't lend itself to them to be early disclosures. But again, we need to keep these factors in mind and have a healthy respect for the lag time that it takes, and for them eventually disclosing, because we need to heal that wound. We are now going to see a role play of a family attempting to deal with the issues of sibling abuse. As you watch this, I want you to be cognizant of and take notes, if you'd like as well, about the following points: the family's response to to the allegation of sibling abuse, and that should include an in-depth assessment on your part of the level of family cohesion, the role of secrecy in the family's view of outside influences. We need to remember that sibling abuse has more often been studied as part of an intrafamilial incest and not as a separate issue. Sibling abuse is more underreported than parent-child abuse by both families and individuals, so people aren't as prepared for abuse. We are now going to see a role play of a family attempting to deal with the issues of sibling abuse. As you watch this, I want you to be cognizant of and take notes if you'd like as well about the following points. The family's response to the allegation of sibling abuse. And that should include an in-depth assessment on your part of the level of family cohesion, the role of secrecy in the family's view of outside influences. We need to remember that sibling abuse has more often been studied as part of an intrafamilial incest and not as a separate issue. Sibling abuse is more underreported than parent-child abuse by both families and individuals, so people aren't as prepared for this to be happening. In earlier studies, sibling abuse was described as being less serious, quote unquote, than parent-child abuse, and often described away as sexual experimentation. The tendency to minimize the action is very strong. Often parents are inaccessible both physically and emotionally during this time, so look for those issues as well. Most studies of sibling abuse has focused either on the victim or the perpetrator. Few have focused upon the relationship between these siblings. You will see that in action in this video, and be clear about your reaction to that. turning our attention this week to a very important issue when we speak about abuse and family violence. We have to have a good understanding of disclosure. Individuals disclose in different ways and different times, whether they're verbal, whether it's by behavior, whether they try to disclose and they're not heard by others. So spending time in looking at the types of this disclosure used by the victim, it helps that victim to become a survivor. It also helps to drive the kind of interventions we want to put into place. And while we're talking about that, there are different types of disclosures. And in my practice, I have really The third type of disclosure we see is what we call the delayed disclosure. This happens many times with either later adolescents or adults who disclose their abuse after many years have gone by, and primarily when situations in their life becomes difficult for them to handle. They were able to control it many times better during the non-disclosure piece, and then they find themselves needing to disclose this behavior. A fourth type of disclosure has to do with a planned disclosure. And a planned disclosure is when the victim reaches a point in their victimization where they are more afraid, if you will, of being with that person, as opposed to being able to talk about it with someone. And I have an example for you of a planned disclosure that I was involved in a number of years ago when I was working in an emergency room at Metropolitan General Hospital in Cleveland, Ohio. And we had a sex abuse program in place in that hospital. And my role in the emergency room was to be available to patients, primarily children, who were seen for a wide variety of illnesses or accidents. I'd like to share with you a Friday evening that I spent in the emergency room, and it was always my role to go into the room once a child and or family member were in the room, and introduce myself as a social worker on call and a social worker in the emergency room, and that I would be available to help them through the process. This one particular Friday evening, I went into a room where there was an 11-year-old girl and her mother. The girl was sitting on the gurney in the room. The mom was sitting in the chair, and I did my thing in terms of introducing myself and my role in the emergency room, and if they have any questions or issues, to let me know. As I was walking out of the room, the girl who was sitting on the gurney had crumpled up piece of paper in her hand and kind of handed it to me on the slide. So I took this piece of paper from her and I walked out of the room, and to this day, I hope that it was more my professional training than my curiosity, because I opened up this small piece of paper that was this big, and I still to this day can quote you from this piece of paper. What it said was, "My dad's raping me. It's happening every night. And if you don't believe me, call," and give the first name of a female and a phone number. So I'm standing there in the hallway, looking at this piece of paper, reading that her father, as she called him, was raping her. It was happening every evening. And if I don't believe her, call this person. I knew a great deal from this piece of paper. I knew that I had to be working at my best this evening and to be working with this child and family and to attempt to understand what was really going on. Fortunately, in the weeks or months before this time, I had, as a part of my role, I had the ability to work with and train the nurses, the residents, the doctors, the security individuals about what we would need to really do and how quickly we would need to do things in order to put things in place to make sure that this child is protected. So there I am with this note, and I must admit that my first thought was, uh-oh, this is a Friday night and it's 10:30, and I usually work until 11, but I am going to have to be here for late into the evening with this family. Not that I mind doing it, but that was my, quite frankly, first thought. So what I did next was I needed to call security and have a security guard come to the emergency room and position themselves outside of this room where the girl and her mother were. Because safety is number one. And I had to make sure no one was going to leave until we have a better understanding of what is going on. After that, I met with the head nurse and explained this situation to her, and she and I went and talked with the charge nurse, who was the nurse that introduced the family to the emergency room and took vital signs and information about why they're in the emergency room. This girl was admitted due to acute abdominal pain. But I had to be sure that I was not treating an appendicitis with an abuse investigation. But the charge nurse assured us that it did not seem to be an immediate or a life-threatening situation for her. What I did next was the head nurse and I met with the residents and doctors in the emergency room so I could lay out the situation and remind them of the plan that we had put into place. And everyone had their role. I did not want the resident to go into the room too soon to start an examination, to allow us the opportunity to explore this issue first. At that point, I knew I had to do the next step, which was go into the room and talk with the mom and the child. When I did this, my first goal was to see if the mom was protective of her child. So I just asked a simple question. Would you mind if I talked to your daughter alone for a while? Hoping against hope that the mom would say, no, I want to be here with my child. But she, like many parents, disappointed me in that regard, saying, sure, to talk with her. I want to go out for a smoke anyways, which she got up and did. I knew, though, that the security guard was going to be following her and close by so that she, A, did not use the phone, and B, was not going to go anywhere other than stay in the confines of the emergency room. So there I was. This girl was sitting on the gurney. I was standing next to her, and I started by saying, I got your note. She responded with, I bet you're not going to believe me either. Which tells me that this young lady tried to disclose this material before and obviously wasn't believed. I could surmise that it was the mom, but I didn't know that for sure, and I had to know more information. So I read her the note that she had given me. I asked who the person was who she gave as her support, if you will, and it turned out to be another girl in her class who was her friend, who had also been through a similar experience. So I'm talking with this girl, and the second thing I tell her is that I'm so proud of her because she is so brave. She is so brave about bringing this information forward. She said in response, do you believe me? And I was not in a position at that point to say I believe her, because I just had this piece of paper, but we needed to investigate that. So what I said to her was, I have no reason not to believe you. And that allowed her to open up and talk some about what was going on between she and her stepfather. As we talked, I said, we have to call your mom back in the room because we have to be clear with your mom about this note. She said, oh my gosh, my mom is not going to believe you, and she's going to grab me and take me out of here. I said, no one is leaving this room until we have a good understanding of what had transpired. And I knew that I could promise her that because the security guard would be outside the room, because she said to me, you can't stop my mom. My mom is all powerful. I said, well, maybe I couldn't stop her, but I have a security guard outside the room who will certainly stop her from taking you anywhere until we have a clear understanding of what happened. I then reminded her that we had to call her mom in, and we had to let her mom know about what is on this piece of paper. She said, my mom's not going to believe that this happened. I've tried this before with her and it didn't work. I said, yes, but this is a new day. This is a new place. You had planned to come here with this information, which tells me that you're uncomfortable with being at home. I said, when your mom comes in the room, we have to tell her this. But I said, you and I have some choices here, because you have to give choices to people who are in crisis, but they have to be choices that they can follow through with and that you can follow through with. So I said, we have to decide who says the words that are on the note. You can do that and I'll leave the room. You can do that and we can be together in the room. I can take your mom out of the room and do that, or we can tell your mom together. Her choice was that she wanted me to say the words and she wanted to be in the room because she wanted to see her mom's face when somebody else brought this to her. And I picked up the fact that she was very angry and upset and didn't trust her mom, but we had to move forward with it. So the mom came back into the room, and I told the mom that her daughter was very brave and gave me this piece of paper outlining what she is saying is going on at home. He said, let me see that piece of paper. I held the paper in my hand. I was not going to relinquish the paper to her because that is potential evidence at this point. So we followed that route, and her mother did exactly as her daughter thought she might. Said, I'm getting out of here. I'm not going. I'm not going to let you talk to my daughter. We are out of here. And she gets up from her chair and starts moving to grab her daughter. And I said, no one is going anywhere until we have an understanding of what is happening at home. In that way, I'm beginning to take, or trying to take, some of the power away from the mom and put it into both myself and the hospital. She said, you can't stop me. I said, I will try, but maybe I can't. If I can't, I have a security guard outside the door who will stop you. She said, oh, that guy who went out for a smoke with me? I said, that's the guy. So she had that understanding at that point. I then left the mom and the daughter in the room with the door open and the security guard there because I knew we had to have an investigation and an interview with that child that evening in the emergency room. I also knew that I had to contact the Child Protection Service Agency, whose responsibility it is to conduct those interviews. So I called their 696 Kids line and explained the situation and had done some training with that agency around issues like this. And I said, I need a social worker out here immediately to conduct an investigative interview. Now, I could have interviewed her but I had to have the individual whose responsibility it is to interview her, because I didn't want this girl to be exposed to multiple interviews. When I left, when I was done with that call, I had another call to make. I called the 2nd Police District, which is a district around Metro General Hospital, to send 2 officers out who myself and the lieutenant did training of officers about how to handle situations like this. So they were coming, and the county social worker is coming, and I went back into the room still with the door open because I didn't want that door closed with them in there. And laid out for both the mom and the child what phone calls I made, who I talked to, and what was going to be happening next. Also, that's a major principle in crisis management as well. I stayed in the room with them until the child protection worker came, introduced them, and put the 2 of them in a separate room for her to interview. I made sure that the security guard was watchful of the mother. When law enforcement came, I met with them as well, showed them the note, and had them go to the house to confront the dad. They're being trained in that way. They do more, if you will, confrontation rather than investigation. They went out to the home, and the dad was there. He came to the door, opened the door, and the officers immediately read him the Miranda Act because they wanted anything that the person said that could then be used as evidence. Many people would guess that he would deny that he abused the child, but occasionally people reverse roles, and individuals who are accused begin to put themselves in the victim role, and that's what this guy did. He said, "Sure, I had sex with her. She asked for it. She wanted me to." And at that point, the officers cuffed him and brought him down to jail. Once he got to jail, of course, he lawyered up immediately and tried to get out of what he said, but what he shared with them first was still there and would always remain there. After the social worker conducted the investigative interview with the child and found that it was substantiated enough that this child should not go home that evening, even though the father was removed from the house. In those days, we were able to do something called a security admit, where we could admit a child to the hospital or an adult to the hospital for their protection until a plan can be worked out. And that's what we did with this girl. The mom was not a happy camper. She eventually stormed out of the emergency room and said, "I'm going home to my husband." She eventually, during that week, bailed him out of jail so that he was back at home. This girl remained in the emergency room and then as an inpatient until county found a safe place for this girl to be. They also investigated the other girl whose name was on the piece of paper. This is a long way of saying that this was a planned disclosure, and for planned disclosures, you have to have a professional plan in place. Now we have to keep in mind that there are also many layers of disclosure. That disclosure equals sharing, which equals risk. Anytime someone discloses and shares, there is a risk involved, which puts them in a position of being vulnerable. What it also does, though, it moves them from being a victim to being a survivor. And that's the way we began to work with her as an inpatient in the hospital. Trust becomes a major, major factor. And it's why I had to lay out for them every step along the way and what I did. Because if in fact she was being abused, and she was, her trust had been violated. And I had to, if you will, value that. And then at the same time, be able to work with her to try to reestablish a degree of trust. The girl was eventually placed into a foster home because there were no family members who were trusted enough to take this girl. And the father eventually was charged with the offense. Now, this had been going on for a period of time because in the note, she said, "My dad is raping me." She didn't say, "My dad raped me." So we knew it was an ongoing process that way. And we had to bring separation to that family. But the child had to know that we trusted in what she had to say and that she can trust in us that way. But of course, trust is something that's built, not something that's just mentioned. I want us to talk for a few minutes about memory and what memory tells us when we conduct investigations. And in its most simplest terms, we have three different types of memory in our brains, if you will. We have something called procedural memory, something called semantic memory, and something called autobiographical memory. Procedure memory is learning and remembering skills. How to do things. How to talk, how to ride a bike, how to throw a ball. Those are all procedural kinds of memories. We go through procedural memory all the time. Many times it is unconscious. Example, we get up in the morning, we shower, we get dressed, we get in our car, we know we have to turn the key or to press the button, whatever it is, and the car starts and we get to work. We rarely think about those things as individual memories. They become rather rote. So our procedural memory has to do more with rote learning. Semantic memories is accumulating and remembering general information. We all know when we look out the window and it's cloudy outside, it might be a good idea to take our umbrella. Semantic memory is also used a great deal. If any of you have in the past been fans of the TV game show called Jeopardy. What Jeopardy does, to a large degree, it helps people to get that general information and general memory moving from the brain into our conscious. Of course, the folks on Jeopardy do a much better job of it than we usually do. The third type of memory is autobiographical memory. And this memory is of personal experiences that we have and that we go through. It's a process that involves an interplay of both reproduction of thoughts and experiences with reconstruction of thoughts and experiences. And that's a pretty high level skill and a complicated skill for many of us. It is, but it's the reconstruction that is subject to many influences, which promote fallibility and inaccuracy at times, because we might remember autobiographical information, but we don't always remember that in a logical step-by-step format. We might remember a piece of it here, a piece of it there, and at times pull other pieces in. So whereas it might seem like this is not a truthful memory, many times it is. There are also a number of variables that affect disclosure. If you have a willing family, it's going to, and a supportive family, it's going to come sooner rather than later. Another variable is the relationship to the perpetrator and how close that person is in the family, how much trust has gone on, and should they be, quote unquote, telling on someone in their family. The child's age and developmental level plays a part in that as well as gender and culture. Some cultures are very closed off in terms of what they share with other people. Also, the severity and the duration of the abuse can affect disclosure. Modesty at times, because some individuals don't have words that they can put for what had happened to them. Some individuals fear that they will be removed from their family if they disclose, and others might fear consequences to themselves and others put on them by the offender. Now, a few facts we need to keep in mind regarding disclosure have to do with people who survive abuse, often disclose in a contradictory, fragmented way that may underline their credibility. So we have to be good askers of non-leading questions in order to conduct solid investigations. We have to keep in mind that repeated abuse later in life can erode the good askers of non-leading questions in order to conduct solid investigations. We have to keep in mind that repeated abuse later in life can erode the structure of one's personality. But repeated abuse in children can form and deform that developing personality. So it's a very sinister piece, this whole issue around child abuse. Disclosure of abuse can also create an emotional shock that can create long-lasting damage to the individual. So we have to have a healthy respect for individuals who disclose. Abuse and its disclosure can alter a person's equilibrium and their ability to trust. The disclosure of abuse can tend to have individuals really fixated at the emotional and developmental level they are at the time of the abuse. So many times a young adult or adolescent may disclose abuse when they were in grade school, and they will have that same reaction to the abuse as a grade schooler because they get caught in that particular stage of development. What we need to keep in mind too is that undisclosed abuse is development. What we need to keep in mind too is that undisclosed abuse is like a wound that never heals and may start to bleed again at any time. If disclosure occurs in a supportive and believing environment, the wound can become visible and can lead to healing. There are also some guidelines we need to be aware of when we work with children following abuse. The first is, don't be afraid to talk about the traumatic event that they have disclosed. Once they disclose it, that they expect people are going to ignore it and move on. We have to let them know that we are askable people and we are talkable people, that they can come to and talk about the issues. More often than not, that happens when we are available, if you will, to them. We have to provide consistent, predictable patterns for their days. We have to give them some structure following disclosure. What's going to happen when? We need to be nurturing and comforting in an appropriate context. We need to be for and with the child. At times, we might be tempted to physically touch the person or put our arms up around them. We should defer that until we have a much better understanding of what touching means to that person. We also want to, as part of, until we have a much physically, we need to be for and with the child. At times, we might be tempted to physically touch the person or put our arms up around them. We should defer that until we have a much better understanding of what touching means to that person. We also want to, as part of this whole process of intervention, we want to discuss expectations for behavior. We want to talk with the child, not at the child. We want to work closely and look for signs of reenactment, of avoidance, and of physiological hyperreactivity. We need to be in a position of protecting that child, and we need to give the child and their non-offending family members choices and get them back to having a sense of control.